This week, I'm going to ask if there are people who are willing to walk us through our land, labor, and life acknowledgement. If someone other than me is willing to read and facilitate that piece. So think about whether or not that's you. So we need 3 readers today. Give it just 1 more minute. I think people are still being admitted. Hey, Ebony.
Hey, Dr. Melina. Hi, everybody.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get started? And I just want to welcome everybody to our 3rd Teaching Bell Hooks class on Black feminism and womanism. And you all remember that you had homework. We were supposed to talk through chapters 6 through 9 of All About Love today. And we are going to do that. But I'm going to shift a little bit because if you remember during our last class reading, our class conversation, we talked about how really as we engage in these texts, Bell Hooks is not the voice of God, even though she's one of the most brilliant people to ever walk the face of this earth, right? There is room for us to engage in conversation. We don't want to just swallow everything even the most brilliant minds teach us. We want to encourage ourselves to grapple with the ideas that are presented. And so some of the events of the last week have caused me to grapple with some of these ideas, right? To think about what she has to offer in this text and in these chapters, but also to think about how my own experiences interpret them and help me to, in my own spirit and mind and being, grow these ideas. And so last week we talked a little bit about this idea of revolution and love and justice. And I gave an offering that just as we talk about justice being what love looks like in public, in the word, and those are the words of Cornel West, that we can also think about how justice, how love is what justice looks like in private. And what does that mean? How do we practice love? Sometimes we're more comfortable being our public selves than really interrogating our private selves, than delving into who we are. And so what really speaks to Bell Hooks' brilliance is the ability to think about her ideas, apply them to our own lives, and then kind of give them our own spin and take on them. So I'm gonna kind of expand a little bit from the text today. We're gonna talk about the text, but I'm gonna offer my own interpretation and my own new ways of knowing, or amended ways of knowing around these questions that are raised. And of course, before we do any of that, we're going to ground ourselves with our land, labor, and life acknowledgement. And yeah, so I'm going to ask you all who would be willing to walk us through. Who would be willing to walk us through? Who would be willing to read the first slide and walk us through our breaths and our grounding? And again, if this doesn't feel good to you, if it doesn't feel good in your body, do whatever feels right to you. Everything that we do in this class is a collective and engagement, but it's also a voluntary engagement. So if the breaths don't feel right to you, if the words feel off to you, you don't have to say them, right? If it feels better to pause than to breathe, then do that. I prefer breath and I choose breath, but that's not what has to be your choice. So who is willing to start us off? And I see Caitlin's hand raised. So Caitlin, would you help us begin with this slide?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah. this land that we inhabit is physically situated in the original ancestral homelands of the Awaswas and Amamutsun people. We pay respect to them and to all Indigenous people, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in this homeland and throughout their historical diaspora. I also wanted to presence that today is marked as a day to honor missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is yet another form of genocide that continues to the present.
Thank you for that inclusion. Thank you for that, Caitlin. Who can read our next slide and walk us through this breath? Ebony?
Please take a deep breath if you're comfortable with that. We pay homage to those who were stolen from Africa, placed in bondage, falsely named as chattel and forced into labor, who were called slaves but never submitted as such, who have always been fully human with an unbroken connection to the divine and to each other. We honor our African ancestors for the still unpaid labor which built what is now the Americas.
Thank you, Ebony. Can anyone read this third and final slide? Just raise your hand, your virtual hand, if you're willing. Yes, Casey.
Good evening, everyone. I invite you to take a breath. To both our Indigenous and African forebears, we commit to the continued struggle for liberation and reparations, for it is only through freedom and justice that we truly give honor. Ashe.
Ashe. Ashe. Thank you all. Thank you all. Do we have any new folks on this call? Do we have any new folks on this call? Vicky. Vicky, you want to come on camera and just introduce yourself, please? And just your name, your pronoun, and what brought you to this class.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Hi, folks. My name is Vicky, pronoun she, her, ella. And what brought me to this class is really just wanting to learn more about Bell Hooks's practices and how to apply love to commit to, justice and have that at the center. So thank y'all for making space for me. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Thank you. And we have someone else new with us. Is that Barbara?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Barbara Garcia Powell. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a student at Prairie View A&M University in the doctoral program, and I was invited by Bakita Pegram and my soror, Stephanie Tilley. So I'm just excited to be here. I'm writing about bell hooks in my dissertation, studying Black women and their decision to transition from STEM to non-STEM programs or degree programs and dealing with STEM identity. So I'm just blessed to be here. Thank you.
Wow, Prairie View is deep. I'm so glad there's so many Prairie View folks on here. And what sorority, Barbara?
The best sorority, soror.
That's what I'm
saying.
My name. Okay.
Oh, those are pretty.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, the first and finest sorority. Of course, I got the accent nail in the green. So there we go. Anybody else new joining us? Ski Wee. What's up, Stephanie's? Anybody else new joining us? Kiana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, folks. My name is Kiana Key, and what brought me here was actually my wife, Victoria, who is also new, but also just learning more about bell hooks and centering love in all my politics and justice. So thank y'all for making space for me.
Beautiful. Thank you for joining us, Kiana. So just in our quick review, what we talked about last week, we just went through the first several chapters of All About Love. I hope everyone has their book, All About Love. This is what we're talking through. We went through the first 5 chapters, and what we really ground down into is that love is an action. Love is an action. And too often in this country and in this world, we throw around the word love without actually defining it. And bell hooks takes great pains to very intentionally define what we mean when we talk about love, that love is more than care. Love and abuse can't occupy the same space. And she says that love is what? Can somebody read that?
Love is the will to nurture our own and another's spiritual growth.
Love is the will to nurture our own and another's spiritual growth. So it's absolutely a verb. It's an action. It's the steps that you take. She says that love is as love does. Love is as love does. One of the things that we talked through is this idea that when we talk about justice, there's absolutely a relationship between love and justice. And Dr. Cornell West says that justice is what love looks like in private. And I think that for many of us who are social justice folks, who are engaged in the movement to transform this world, we understand justice more quickly than we understand love. We're willing to delve into justice more quickly than we're willing to delve into what it means to love. And so we know the positions that we're supposed to take. And I said that in one of these classes, one of the things that we'll do is really kind of chart out our vision, our goals, and our objectives as we move towards love, as we think about a love ethic, which is what we're going to be talking about today. It's really important that we have a picture of what the world should look like, not what the world does look like, not limiting it to someone else's vision, but really radically imagining the world in which we want to live. And so many of us know, are in the work of saying that justice work means that everybody has all of what they need and most of what they want, right? Justice is everyone having all of what they need and most of what they want. And what that looks like means universal housing. It means liberatory models of education. It means body autonomy. We've been talking a lot about that this week, right? It means that we topple systems of white supremacy and move towards racial justice. It means cultural expression. These are the kinds of things that are required if justice is to exist. Many of us are brave and courageous and visionary enough to call ourselves abolitionists, to say that we topple old systems of harm and bring into being new systems of care. This is the work of justice. Many of us are unafraid to engage and work in the streets, work in our neighborhoods, work in communities to usher in justice. And if we are to be justice warriors, it also means that in private, we have to know how to love. And for me, that's been actually a more challenging process than engaging in justice work. And so I was born in the 1970s in Oakland, California, which makes me 29 years old, right? But it also makes me someone who has lived in a space and time where justice is almost like air, or the quest for justice is almost like air, right? I am of the Panther Cub of the hip hop generation, right? I am part of a generation who was taught that if something's not right, if there's injustice, you shut it down. And I can think of many, many examples. I think of one example when I was in high school. I grew up in East Oakland, but the schools were so terrible in my neighborhood that almost nobody went to those schools. So I lived in an area of Oakland, California that we call Funktown. And these systems who don't love us, who don't practice justice, refuse to allow the Black children who lived in Funktown, which is literally 10 blocks away, walking distance to Oakland High School, to actually go to Oakland High School. Instead, they drew the district lines in such a way that we would have to go 40 something blocks east to a school called Fremont High School. If Barbara's on the phone or on the line, she'll vouch for me. Barbara Hoke will vouch for me on that because she lived on my block and remembers what happened. And so we were supposed to go to a school called Fremont High School. Well, Fremont High School was in 69th Village, right? And so 69th Village, the kids from 69th Village were always at war with the kids from Funktown. And so my senior year, there were so many murders in and around, because this is also the era of crack cocaine. I'm talking about the early 1990s, where there were a lot of incidents of what they will call community violence. But my friend and sister Kat Brooks will be quick to remind us that all violence is state-sanctioned violence, right? So when you talk about systems that say two warring neighborhoods have to go to the same school, when you talk about a system that flooded both of those neighborhoods with crack cocaine and guns, then you're talking about murders that they will call Black on Black crime, but there's no such thing as Black on Black crime. There's not even a such thing as community violence. That violence is sanctioned by the state, right? And so rather than going to Fremont High School, my mother, who was an elementary school teacher and a very involved mother, put me on a school bus on a public bus starting at 5:30 in the morning across cities. So I left Oakland, went through Emeryville, and wound up at Berkeley High School, right? And so at my high school, the closest store, we were an open campus, so during lunch, all the kids would go to a store called Blue and Gold, right? And we would go in and buy our lunch. And Blue and Gold was white owned, and they had a practice of allowing the Black children to only enter one at a time.
Okay, looks like Dr. Abdullah might be having some internet trouble, so we're just going to hang tight, and hopefully the internet or computer will be good for a return. Thank you all.
Is it all right if I make a comment, kind of reflecting back on what Dr. Melina was saying? Don't want to infringe if this time
Go
should
for
be. Okay, cool, sweet. Well, hey everybody, Sterling, pronouns he, him, calling in from unceded California territory. I just found it really powerful what Dr. Melina was, I think, alluding to about how only one child was let in the store at a time, because it caused back to memories for me. I'm originally from the state of Indiana, and there's still some restaurants that won't serve folks who look like me, so I've been denied access to restaurants, even, in these times, you know what I mean? So I found that really relatable, and Dr. Melina's not here, but I wanted to offer some appreciation for them sharing their story, and would just love to hear from anybody else. Did anybody else kind of grow up in segregated communities and have any experiences trying to, in the spirit of touching on Bell Hooks's, book, Love Across Borders, like finding community and partnership with folks who maybe grew up on the other side of the tracks from where you grew up on? I find that, that was coming up for me a lot in this book, and reflecting on what Dr. Melina just said. That's like top of mind for me. So just wanted to offer that up.
Oh, well, while Dr. Abdullah is not here, we'll just consider this open forum. So you all can chime in when you would like as
She's back, I
community
think.
learning space. Oh,
Yeah, I
okay.
haven't joined. I don't know what happened. There was a flash in the house, and then the internet went out, and it's still not back. So I guess it wasn't meant for me to share my PowerPoint today. But I want to say thank you to Ebony for demonstrating love and sending me the link so I can join by phone. So are we good with just walking back through my little story about blue and gold? I think that's where we left off.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not going to share the slides that I intended to share, although maybe I can share one thing. Maybe that's what's intended for this moment. So I went to Berkeley High School, and there was a store called Blue and Gold, where they made the Black children line up one by one, and only one could enter the store at a time. And for 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds, it takes a minute for you to realize that this is an injustice, that this is racism. And so it takes a minute, but once you realize, you're all in. And so as young as 14 and 15, we began to picket blue and gold. It didn't take long before blue and gold was challenged to change their policies. And, we were able to enter the store with our entire groups, not forced to stand outside. And that was a practice of justice early on, or demand for justice early on, that I was a part of as a young teenager, because we'd seen it everywhere, right? Every park had people handing out socialist papers, right? Every other person's family member was a member of the Black Panther Party or an ally. My parents were part of leading those survival programs. So justice was something that was readily practiced. It was something that was kind of sewn into our beings as young people in that time and place. Love, however, was something that was much more difficult to define, and I'm still exploring what love looks like. And so just as justice is what love looks like in public, love is what justice looks like in private. So what does that mean? What does love look like? That's what we were engaging in. And I'm going to pull up my notes for myself. I'm sorry that I can't share them with you, but we talked about what that looks like. What does that mean for each of us? What does that mean for each of us, right? So you were given homework, and I'd like to engage in discussion around that homework. Give us one example where you've given love and one example where you've received love this week. One example where you've given love and one example where you've received love this week. And so if you can just, I can't do as much on this phone as I could have done on the computer. So if you could just unmute yourself and answer that question to lead us into this part of the conversation. Love this week. Where have you received love this week? How have you received love this week? Don't make me jump to mine. How have you received love this week? How have you given love this week? Given love this week.
I'll share. I don't know if you can see my hand raised on your phone, so.
No, I can't see the raise on in it.
Okay, so I'll start with received love. So I'm a teacher here in Houston, Texas, and this is Teacher Appreciation Week. So we've been receiving a lot of love this week, and in particular today, my students made a book for me of just all the things that they love about me, and so I enjoyed that. And I've given love because last week I went on a trip to Mexico and I brought all of my students back friendship bracelets, because just extending some type of friendship to them, just to show them that I'm your teacher, but I can also be friendly toward you. So those are my two examples.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Anybody else? And again, just jump in. I can't do as much, can't see as much on this phone. Let's get one more person.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Beetle. So one example of where I have given love this week, my spouse was going through actually a really difficult week and feeling a little out of balance in terms of being able to self-regulate. His aunt passed away. He's been stressed out with work. There's just a lot going on. And so actually it was kind of coming out as like taking it out on me. And so I paused, and like half a day later was able to kind of back up and be like, okay, something else is going on. I can still be here for you, even though it's kind of landing on me. So I think it took some effort to, like, you know, even be there for a person who was really like that dysregulated and that close to me. So I guess that's an example. And then received love. I went to a conference yesterday and made a lot of like sort of new connections, but felt like they were quick and deep because of the values-based focus of the conference that brought us all together.
Great. And I think my computer is back up.
Recording in progress.
Yes. Okay. I'm happy to be back on the computer, which means I get to share my slides after all. Great. Is there anyone else who wants to share?
I can share.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Well, it was Eid this week, and it was also the end of the semester, so it was my last classes of the week. And so my students in my class on Islam and gender kind of waylaid me with a request to just continue. They were like, we don't want this class to end. And so can we just keep meeting? I was like, this is the first time I've been asked to keep going. And so it was a really nice Eid present, but I feel like we do this for each other. Like as a professor, I've really shifted in how I teach and how I relate. I used to be a cop in a way as a professor, and now I try to be there as a friend, as a fellow sojourner, and to try to, you know, support their journey. So that's kind of the giving and receiving that I experienced this week.
That's really beautiful. That's really beautiful. Is there any one last person who wants to share before we get into, oh, it's 7:30. Actually, let's go ahead. Sorry about the slowdown with the internet, everyone. But there was a second part of your homework. There was a second part of your homework where you were asked if there were any modifications that you needed to make to the way that you demonstrated love. Were there any modifications that you needed to make to the way that you demonstrated love? The exact question was, give an example of where your intention of love required modification. Am I the only one who had to fix some stuff, Casey?
I could share.
Okay.
My children are 14 and 12, and ninth grade and sixth grade. And they have experienced being very stressed out by school and grades, and feeling disappointed in themselves when they don't get good grades. And I had to modify my expression of love, because they thought that getting good grades, the actual mark, is what made me proud and happy. And I had to modify the expression of love and give them more grace and more patience, and a deeper explanation as to what I believed the grades represented about character, about discipline, a work ethic. And it's that I was in pursuit of, and not necessarily the mark. So it was a lesson for me in modifying communication around expectation.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I was co-signing Casey as the parent of a 10th and a 6th grader. Yes, yes. I think I might have shared that for my 10th grader, I had to talk with her about her responsibilities and doing what she needed to do in school, but also remembering that grades aren't everything, especially coming out this pandemic. Their joy and their well-being is really the most important thing. And anyway, I don't mean to co-sign too long, but I had a meeting at her school, and I thought about that a couple of people who are in our circle, of the women in my circle, actually lost children to suicide in the last year. And the fact that our children are happy and healthy is the most important thing. And making sure that they know that. But also, what Bell Hooks reminds us is that there's also boundaries and consequences. So no, Amara, you don't get to talk in the class and in the hallway for 15 minutes when you're supposed to be in class. But I think interrogating what love looks like, and what pride looks like and support looks like, is also really important. So thank you for sharing that, Casey. Is there one more person who just wants to share quickly how their intention of love may have had to be modified?
I'll share.
Yes.
So I realized I had a breakthrough with my partner this week, because I am very intimidated by anger and people's expression of anger. But my breakthrough was that when she's expressing her anger, it's really compounded with grief and sadness and despair and other complex emotions. So my challenge as someone who loves her and wants to create space for her is having the courage to sit through and ask the right questions to let all the other emotions simmer out.
Yes. Yes. That's great. All right. So I do want to hop into this week's readings, and also encourage us to keep track. That homework should be ongoing homework, right? It should be ongoing homework. We should be constantly thinking about how we demonstrate love with ourselves, with our families, with our communities. And what we're going to be talking about is, for the remainder of the class, is beloved community. And I thought this set of readings was really, really important for me, especially some of you have seen what things looked like for me this week. I'm gonna share a little bit about that. But I wanna talk about what Bell Hooks is saying, and then jump into this question of community love, of community care, and then go beyond her definition to really talk about beloved community. Am I still here for you? I haven't dropped off again, have I? Okay. I don't know what's going on with this computer. There we go. Your screen sharing is paused. Why? There
we see you, but not the, oh, there it is. I was gonna say, we see you, but
Oh.
not the screen, but now we see you, see both.
So as we walk through the chapters that we read for this week, right? She talks about values and a love ethic, and we talked about how all the great movements for social justice in our society have strongly emphasized a love ethic. She starts the book with that, right? So we're not just reading about a mushy, corny kind of love. We're not reading just about the kind of love that's in, songs and in most of the movies that they try to condition us to think that love is, right? We're talking about a love that is intrinsically tied and bound to justice, right? So the movements, the great movements, especially the revolutionary movements, have been tied to a great love ethic. She also talks about the next chapter, talks about greed and simply love. That one kind of threw me. I was like, what do you mean greed? Did anyone else have that reaction as they started into that chapter? Simply love. No one else was thrown off by the beginning, which says greed, and has read the Bible and knows that greed is one of the 7 deadly sins, and said, oh no, how could greed and love be tied together? No one else had that response?
Well, I thought it was interesting how she did tie it in. I was wondering where she was going with it and talking about just materialism and how, obsessed we can become. And so it made sense once I started, reading through it, and just seeing that she's saying that, love is simple and it's often complicated with things and the acquisition of things.
And so what we're fed about love, right? If you think about films like Pretty Woman, right? Like how we're conditioned to believe that things translate into love. That's actually not love, right? That's actually not love. It can be a demonstration of care, but it's not actually love, right? So love doesn't require materialism, right? And then she talks about community and the development of community. And this is where I want to kind of ground down into a bit, because I appreciated her offering, but I also wanted to go a little bit deeper. If you remember in that chapter, she talks about how romantic love is elevated above all other kinds of love, right? So this culture is really pushes romantic love and a particular kind of romantic love, as you see in the nuclear family. And she talks about how the nuclear family is patriarchal and capitalistic, right? The nuclear family really isolates us from each other. I would also say that the nuclear family is white supremacist, right? If you think about every other group that is not white, the idea of family being confined to the nuclear family is a falsehood, right? If you talk to any Black family, the queen of the family is who? It's not really your mama. Who is it?
The grandmother.
Grandmother.
Yeah,
The grandmother. Ebony says that's the grandmother, right? The queen of the family is the grandmother. My children will never tell on me to the state, but they will tell on me to my mama, right? And they know that my mother trumps everything, right? And so the idea of the nuclear family of the mother, the father, and 2 children is really what I would say is a white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist, and heteronormative approach to family, and is not the truth of how the majority of the world lives or functions. Would folks agree with that? I see someone typing into the chat that the same is also true for Latinx families. Do you want to expound on that, Michelle? Oh, that's Michelle.
No, but that was just my best guess because that's the same in my family, my Colombian family.
Yeah, and I remember the same being true for the Samoan family that lived across the street from me. There was never a gathering that didn't have at least 3 generations present, right? That your aunties, you know, as we walk into Mother's Day, we just had a demonstration. We have a protest every Wednesday as Black Lives Matter. And as we were celebrating the mamas of those who were stolen by police, the aunties were also there and talked about how they helped to raise those children too, right? So your auntie is, my mother, in fact, thought that her aunt was actually her mother, but she wasn't, but I think she hoped she was, because Nina had a turquoise Thunderbird and was like the most beautiful woman to ever walk the earth. And so my mother often fantasized about Nina being our mother, but she was her auntie, and aunties are often, you know, just as important as mothers, grandmothers, or queens. And this notion that the father is the head of the family, in most non-white families, the opposite is actually true, you know? And so it's really important that we disrupt this narrative of the nuclear family, which I think Bell Hooks makes a really great point about, really sets the women of the family, the children of the family, anyone other than the men of the family, right, up for abuse. And so she talks about that in that chapter on community, and then also talks about the importance of friendships. I want to come back to that. The last piece that we read, the last chapter that we read, is about mutuality. Who can jump into a quick conversation about mutuality, or what she calls the heart of love? Mutuality. What does that mean? Mutuality. What is she saying? You said that was the last chapter you assigned. I didn't read that far. Truly leaning into interdependence. Can you say more, Caitlin?
I think it's really believing that my well-being and your well-being are connected, and that if you are struggling, that it's a call for me to extend myself and to see your well-being as very fundamentally like affecting my well-being, that I want to put my head on the pillow at night knowing that I extended the care that was needed to those whom are deserving of my care, you know, which in my world is everyone. So how do we really adopt an ethic that reflects that, you know, no one is free until everyone is free, and that if I have and you need, that what I have can overflow and help to address your need. And it sounds like, on the one hand, so conceptual, but I think in COVID, in so many instances, we saw communities, my community included, really rise to meet this. So how do we take that seriously in the day-to-day?
That's right. And that mutuality has been how people of color have survived, right? And so you're right, Caitlin, in COVID, we saw this concept of mutual aid kind of become popularized. But we also need to remember that when we think about how African people were brought to this country and the concept of mutual aid, the concept of mutual aid came with us, right? The principle of Ujamaa, cooperative economics, came with us. It became fundamental to our spiritual practices and our community practices. When we think about like the AME Church and the way in which they collected funds so that Black people, African people could have proper burials, so that there could be food given, so that there could be shelter given. When we talk about women like Mama Harriet Tubman, who spent her life not just bringing more than 1,000 people to freedom, but then once we won the end of chattel slavery, setting up a home for the elderly and infirmed under the idea that everyone has a right to shelter and to love and to food and to all of the things necessary to sustain themselves. So that's what mutuality is about. And it counters this idea, this capitalist notion of reckless and rampant and harmful individualism, right? Where we're socialized to believe that you should only look out for yourself and the nuclear family that you are a part of, that you were either born into or that you have built, right? Your secondary family, as she calls it. So that's what mutuality is about, that we really achieve safety and justice and a better world, even for our individual selves, when we build a world that's recognizing interdependence, the interdependence of us all. And I think that's how I want to tie it back into this principle of beloved community. And I didn't intend, again, to talk this long or I needed those few minutes that I was off the Zoom, but that's okay. We'll walk through as quickly as we can. I want to walk through, what does beloved community look like? Not just loving communion, not just community, not just friendships, which she says we should treat with more care and reverence, right? Which we should, right? And when we think about our friends, right? When you think about the toughest times in your life, I can think about my divorce as the toughest time in my life, a time when I felt like I was going to completely fall, right? Here I am in Los Angeles with no family and 3 very small children and no money. And it was my friends who let me kind of go insane for a minute. And I did. I couldn't keep it together, right? I wasn't expecting it and I couldn't keep it together. And it was Molly bringing me soup, right? And it was others coming to make sure that my children were dropped off and picked up at school. And so that friend love is something that we don't put as much value on as we should. But I would say that I think that building beloved community means building more than friendship. It's more than revering and honoring friendship. It's more than nurturing our friendships, right? It's the coming together of groups who are united by a shared vision. It's what we call chosen family for a purpose that is larger than the individuals who make it up, right? So beloved community is a concept that's developed by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? Beloved community is about recognizing that the world that we live in is not the world that we have to live in, and striving to build the world that we like to see in our spaces of autonomy, right? So how do we build many versions of the world in which we want to live? How do we build mutual aid when we live in a capitalist nation, right? How do we give and receive in ways that are interdependent and mutually beneficial? How do we practice Feminism and womanism. How do we practice what I call womanist mothering, where all of us bear responsibility for our collective children, right? Where all of that responsibility doesn't fall solely on the parents that birthed them, and definitely not alone on the mother that birthed them. I love having several people that I call mama. I have my own mama, then I have Mama Paula, and I have Mama Rashida, and I have Mama True, and they have been vital for me. And so how do we build this beloved community, and why is it important? So just very quickly, and I think I have time, many of you know that I was violently assaulted by campus police at Cal State LA on Sunday. Shahana talked about that Monday was Eid, Sunday was the last day of Ramadan. I went into the space on the campus that I've taught at for 20 years to watch the mayoral debate on May Day, on the last day of Ramadan, on the first day of Teacher Appreciation Week, right? I walked into the space to watch this mayoral debate, and I invited my students to also participate. Rather than being treated as a human being, I was the white man who was the director, and I mean the white man literally, and I mean the white man figuratively, right? The white man who was in charge of the event told me that I didn't have a ticket. He's a white man who also called me friend for more than 20 years, who I've shared probably 100 meals with. Told me that this is a ticketed event and I didn't have a ticket, and proceeded to call campus police on me and my friend, who was another professor at a neighboring school and also a part of my beloved community. We couldn't believe that something like that would happen, but kind of could. So we live streamed a little bit of it, but sat there and waited for the debate to start. And just minutes before the televised debate was to start, in a theater that held 192 people, that only had fewer than 20 people inside of it, the police came in and told my friend Tabitha to leave. She got up and starts leaving. When they told me to leave, I contested it and said, I teach here. And they didn't need to hear more. So they just grabbed me, pulled me out, grabbed me by my two arms. And then when they dragged me down the aisle, they told two more cops to grab my 2 feet. And they pulled me out of the theater and through this building with my legs propped wide open, and over the yells that you're hurting me. And I was completely in shock and felt extremely wounded by those actions. But what gave me hope, and I want to just show this for you quickly. I know we're a little bit beyond time, so if you can stay on, please do stay on. Is, as you can see, my feet are now on the ground. There was a Black trans woman who I never met before in my life, who, when she saw them carrying me out, yelled to them, put her down so she can walk out with dignity. And they listened to her and they put my feet down, but they're still pulling on me, as you can see. I want to show you what beloved community looks like. So just bear with me for a few minutes if you can. I think it'll give you a great week. Can you all hear?
What the fuck are you kids doing? Hey, don't touch him. Don't touch him. He's the professor here. What are you doing? Let go of him. Let go, you fucking pig. She's a professor at this college. She's a professor at this college. You don't touch him. What is she in the head for? Get your fucking head closed. She has a doctor. Let her go. Let her go, bro. Let her go. You're hurting me. Let her go.
want to show you just quickly one more view of that. If I can pull it up in time. I want to show you one more view of that. Let's see if I can. That view doesn't show you how many people. There were about 50 people who saw them tugging at me and ran around the building. Can you all see this?
Yes, but we can also see a lot of your screen.
I don't care. Wait.
Okay.
Did I have some text messages?
I'm just saying, okay. Just making sure you knew.
So did you see what ultimately happened? Did you all see that? That's beloved community. That when they saw me being carried out, when they heard me being threatened with arrest, about 50 folks, including some folks who I'd never met before in life, came and put their bodies on the line, said, let her walk out with dignity. No, you're not taking her anywhere. You're not gonna arrest her. They put their bodies in between me and the police. They literally rescued me. And the last part, you can see me walking out. I want to uplift that love is the building of beloved community, is deciding to come together with people who share your vision for the world and building a community together that reflects that vision. That's what's sacred, that when we talk about operationalizing love, when we talk about love as an action, it's building that kind of love. And so what I want to offer is, for your homework this week, I want you to think about where you have or where you can build beloved community, where you have or where you can build beloved community. And that might be in your sorority or fraternity. That might be on your campus. That might be in your movement or in your church. But I think that when we think about the time that we're living in, when they're coming for us, when they're threatening body autonomy of all kinds, when they're saying that these are the rights and freedoms that they're going to roll back, when they are unleashing police violence on us for sitting in the back of an auditorium, right? And those of us who teach know that when you're watching, we've been encouraged to tell our students to watch debates, that this is civic participation. If you're Black, you are criminalized for that, right? This is the time where now more than ever, that love must be demonstrated within the context of beloved community. So your homework is, where do you have or where can you build beloved community? Does that work for y'all? Okay. Any questions before we go? And I know that we're a little over time. And again, my apologies for the internet issues. Anything before we go? Yes, Ebony.
And I'm sorry if this is in the syllabus and I'm asking anyway, but what chapter should we read?
We're finishing out the book. So
Finish it. Okay.
This is our last read of All About Love. We're finishing the last chapters. I think there's 3 chapters left. Anything else?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that, Casey. All right. We'll see you, inshallah, next week.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.